You're holding a rock, not a weapon, not a tool, just a rock. Heavy, cold, and completely ordinary. Now imagine you are standing on a flat African plain roughly 3.3 million years ago, surrounded by tall grass that could be hiding anything. You're not the biggest animal out here. You're not the fastest. You have no claws, no venom, no armor. All you have is that rock in your hand, a body that is trembling slightly, and a mind that is about to change the world. What happens next? What your ancestors figured out how to do with that rock would eventually lead to weapons so sophisticated, so brutally ingenious, that some of them still baffle researchers today. This is the story of how early humans became the most dangerous species that ever walked the earth. And it started much earlier and went much further than you probably imagine. The oldest known stone tools on the planet were discovered in 2015 at a site called Lomekwi 3 in what is now Kenya. Archaeologist Sonia Harmon and her team unearthed flaked stone artifacts dated to 3.3 million years ago, pushing back the origin of tool making by 700,000 years. These were not made by Homo sapiens or even by Homo erectus. They were made by something older, something that had just realized a sharp edge could change everything. Think about what that means. For hundreds of thousands of years before your species even existed, your ancestors were already working with stone, already learning, already adapting. But a sharp rock is not a weapon yet, it is a beginning. The real leap came with what archaeologists call hafting, the act of attaching a stone point to a wooden handle using natural adhesives. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, researchers led by Lynn Wadley discovered residues of a compound glue made from plant gum, red ochre and fat used to bind stone blades to shafts roughly 70,000 years ago. This is not primitive improvisation, this is chemistry, this is engineering. Your ancestors were deliberately combining multiple materials to produce something none of them could do alone. The resulting weapon was a spear, and not a clumsy stabbing stick. A hafted spear could be thrown accurately, penetrate deeply, and, most importantly, be used at a distance. For an animal with no natural armor and no fangs, distance was everything. Distance was survival. Can you picture it? A group of early humans crouched in high grass at the edge of a waterhole in the late afternoon. The light is orange and low. The air smells like dust and dung. A giant longhorned buffalo. Pelorovis, an extinct species that stood nearly 2 meters at the shoulder, comes slowly to drink. Your ancestor does not rush, does not panic, waits, breathes, then releases a precisely weighted, hafted spear from 30 meters away. That scene, or something very close to it, happened across Africa and Asia for tens of thousands of years. But the spear was only the beginning of the arsenal. The Atlatl, a word borrowed from the Nahuatl language, is perhaps the most underrated weapon your ancestors ever invented. A spear thrower, essentially, a flat stick with a notch or hook at the end that cradles the base of a dart and effectively extends the length of your arm. When you cast a dart with an atlatl, your arm, your forearm, your wrist, and the device itself all act as levers in sequence, multiplying the speed of the projectile. The result is a dart that travels at over 150 kilometers per hour. Before gunpowder, nothing in human hands moved faster. Atlatls appear in the archaeological record at least 30,000 years ago. Ancient examples have been found in France at the Cro-Magnon site, some carved from reindeer antler into delicate animal shapes. a mammoth, an ibex, even while being purely functional killing tools. Your ancestors were not just making weapons. They were decorating them. They were expressing something avowing about themselves through the instruments of death. That is not the behavior of a desperate animal. That is the behavior of a culture. And then came the bow. The bow and arrow is so familiar to you now that it is easy to forget how radical it was when it first appeared. Researchers have identified what may be the oldest arrow tips in the world at Pinnacle Point in South Africa, dating to roughly 64,000 years ago. Tiny pressure-flaked stone points called microliths that could only have been hafted to small shafts too thin to be thrown by hand. Francesco Del Rico and his colleagues have argued that this evidence pushes back the bow's origin by tens of thousands of years beyond what was previously accepted. A bow stores energy in a bent limb and releases it in a fraction of a second. An arrow weighs almost nothing and moves almost silently. You could hunt from cover without revealing your position. You could strike prey that a thrown spear could never reach, and you could fire multiple shots in the time it once took to recover a single weapon. The bow did not just change how your ancestors hunted. It changed what they could eat, how far they could range, how much energy they had left over for other things. Every leap in human technology created a cascade of other changes. Better weapons meant more food meant more children who survived, more children meant more minds working on the next problem. But here is the part that almost nobody talks about. The most dangerous weapon your ancestors ever developed was not made of stone or wood or sinew. It was made of knowledge. Around 400,000 years ago, evidence from sites like Schöningen in Germany, where researcher Hartmut Thieme excavated 8 perfectly preserved wooden throwing spears, balanced like modern javelins, suggests that early humans had understood something profound about physics, about mass and center of gravity, about how an object moves through air. These were not accidents. These were the products of generations of accumulated observation, experiment, and teaching. Your ancestors passed knowledge down. They watched, they imitated, they corrected. A child in a hunter-gatherer band did not just watch an adult make a spear. They watched for years, handling the materials, making mistakes, refining their grip, learning which stones flaked cleanly and which ones shattered, which resins held firm in the heat and which ones dissolved in rain. The weapon was never just the object. The weapon was everything that went into making it. And this is where the counterintuitive truth lands. You probably think of early humans as desperate survivors, barely scraping by, always on the edge of death. But the archaeological record suggests something different. The sophistication of these tools, the chemistry, the geometry, the aesthetic care, points to people with enough time, enough stability, and enough social structure to develop real expertise. Violence was real. Danger was real, but so was mastery, so was pride, so was the patient pleasure of making something well. You still feel that when you spend hours on something until it is exactly right. When you feel the satisfaction of a well-made object in your hand. When you teach someone else a skill you have spent years learning. That is not modern behavior. That is 3 million years old. You're holding a rock, and somewhere inside you, you already know what to do with it